Okay, well, welcome back to Powering Conversation with SP Energy Networks. I am absolutely delighted to be joined today by Judy Murray, incredible tennis player in her own right, tennis coach and advocate of women in sport, and someone who I am extremely excited to chat to. So first of all, Judy, how are you? Just fresh off the back of being at Wimbledon?
Yeah, I've been back for a week or so, and I've actually this morning been out on the golf course because I'm not the golf course. I was down at the pitching putt, which is a big senior open at Gleneagles this week, so you can't get access to the driving range or the golf courses. So it was the pitching putt for me this morning, which is a new challenge. I took up golf about 5 months ago now, and part of it's an initiative to encourage more women to try golf. There's 4 of us starting from scratch, and we've got 6 months to learn, and then we'll play in a competition. And it's basically documenting our story as to how we found it, what made us want to get into it. We're all at different stages of our life, and we're all well-known people from completely different spheres. So, I think for me that I've learned a lot from doing it, that probably just cemented everything that I feel about women in sport. And that's the importance of finding something that you enjoy doing or you think you'll enjoy doing, and finding somebody or a group of friends to do it with. The fun, friends and fitness thing that kind of for me is the 3 main ingredients for a successful women's sporting environment have actually come, as I would have expected probably, into my experience of learning a brand new sport at my ripe old age.
Not at all. And I couldn't agree more, to be honest. Like, I guess for me, like one of the biggest drivers I have as an athlete is my teammates. They're kind of the people that drive me to be better and be the best I can be for them. And I completely agree around how important that kind of friendship and that enjoyment and having people there that make you want to go and do it is. So before we go into kind of the depths of your career and all of that, I always like to kind of start at the beginning. So you've achieved a huge amount, both as a tennis player, a tennis coach, and now as a kind of, I guess, advocate for improving opportunities and things like that for women in sport. But I want to start with, why tennis? Why was it tennis, and why has it always been tennis?
I think it was tennis because my mum and dad both played tennis, and I was the oldest child in a family of 3. And my mum and dad both played for the men's and women's teams at Dunblane Tennis Club, and they actually both played for the North of Scotland County. So they were good tennis players. And of course, for them to continue playing tennis at the club, they kind of trekked the 3 of us down to the club, and we kind of hung around waiting for them to finish their matches or finish their social nights or whatever it was that they were doing. And, in those days, you played on a full court with a wooden racket, which was very heavy and very long, and regular tennis balls. So really, you had to be about 10 at the very least to be able to play tennis back then. Nowadays, you've got shortened rackets, mini courts, sponge balls or pressureless balls. And, it's very easy for kids to get started at sort of 5 or 6. But back then, you probably had to be about 10. So I think from many years of hanging around the tennis club, which was a wonderful place to hang around because there were trees to climb, and there was, other kids playing football and cricket and, kind of mini versions of it on the grassy area beside the clubhouse. There was board games in the clubhouse and so forth. But eventually got to an age and stage where I was able to join in. And, in those days, there was no such things as tennis coaches. And I was lucky that my parents could show me how to play and spend a lot of time with me. I think I'm a big advocate in the importance of learning to play the game by playing the game. I think that nowadays what I see is kids being programmed into activity from a young age, and that it all becomes about the coaching, and more kids than ever before are getting coaching, and less kids than ever before actually playing the game, playing competitions and tournaments or school teams and club teams. And that worries me on behalf of my sport. But that's how I got into it. And as I got better at it. I was allowed to play with that sort of club. Really, they taught me how to play the game. All the older people at the club. So I grew up in a very community-focused, small village club. Went on to play for the district. You can't really play for Scotland at tennis. It's a GB sport. They have sort of friendly home internationals. So I played in that. But I think that all through my high school years at school, I think I always thought I was going to be a gym teacher. I mean, the prospect of being a tennis player from Scotland never would have entered my mind. I might have dreamed about it, but never thought it would be possible, simply because Scotland didn't really do tennis in those days. You know, and there were no such thing as indoor courts. There were no coaches. So I played tennis in the summer, and I played badminton in the winter. And I played for Scotland at badminton, Scotland juniors at badminton. Yeah, those were my two sports. And I think that a lot of my frustration at the lack of infrastructure in tennis when I was a good British level junior, despite having no coaching or any kind of formal opportunities, I would say my frustrations from not having the chance when I was 17, when I left school, to be able to join a training squad or take it seriously, probably led me eventually to when I started to coach. And I started as a volunteer at our local club when the boys were tiny. I wasn't a coach, I was just somebody who went along to help out a couple of hours a week. But I think that as I sort of got more and more involved in coaching, it was a real goal for me to create an infrastructure that would allow any of our promising young players to actually be able to develop in our country. So I don't think I ever would have thought that it would be a career for me as a coach, because when I was volunteering, there were still no indoor courts, still nobody even thinking that they might become a tennis player. But I think I've always loved my sport, and I discovered through volunteering that I enjoyed sharing my sport. And then, of course, I took some qualifications, and I took some more qualifications, and I think I saw that as the players that I was working with were getting better and better, I realised I didn't know enough, that the game had changed so much from when I played, the wooden racket, step in, follow through over your shoulder, that kind of thing. They were using double-handed backhands and topspin serves and things that were just like, what on earth is that? So I knew that to invest in the kids I was working with, I needed to invest in myself. So I set about trying to learn as much as I could by attending workshops and conferences in other countries, because there really wasn't anybody to learn from in Scotland. And that was really my journey, I suppose, into coaching. And and I'm still learning. I'm still always looking at, well, as you will, you have to always look at the competition from other sports. You have to look at the competition within your own sport. And the world's changed so much. I mean, look at all the technology that helps you to coach and analyze better. That was never around, when I started out. I was always pen and paper, and in lots of ways I still am. But I taught myself how to do video analysis way back in the early 2000s when nobody else was doing it, because I saw other sports doing it. So it's been a journey, and it's still going.
Yeah, it certainly has. In terms of, I guess, that transition from being a high level player to then transitioning to coaching, what was it that kind of ultimately led you to fully step away from being a kind of high level player and that being your focus to then coaching really being your key focus?
Yeah, when I left school, I had got good enough grades in my hires, as they were called then, to have a place at Edinburgh University. And my dad had said if I got good enough grades, I could leave after fifth year and take a year to see how good I could become at tennis. But the reality of that was, back then, the world was such a different place back then. You were completely disconnected. Flights were a rarity. There's no such thing as mobile phones or ATM machines or the internet. You really were completely disconnected. And because I was the only one in Scotland looking to do something like that, and because my mum had my two younger brothers to look after and my dad ran his own business, I really had to go off on my own to try to do that. So I was trying to coach myself, I guess, or learn through play. but also having to negotiate my way around Europe, entering tournaments, finding accommodation, finding the transport and so forth. And that's not an easy thing to do when you're 17. I mean, it's probably an easier thing to do now. Much easier thing to do now. But back then, it probably was very unsafe as well. And I think that when I was robbed on a bus in Barcelona, this is probably just about 6 months, between 4 and 6 months into me trying to play. I was on a crowded bus and I got off the bus and realised my bag had been opened and my wallet had gone, and it was the money that I just picked up from the Post Restaurant, which is the post office in Barcelona. That's where you had to go to pick up money. Your parents wired you money and you had to go in, show your passport, sign for it, etc. Think how easy it is now to go to an ATM machine or just to use your contactless card. And anyway, my money was gone, my tickets home were gone, my passport was gone, it would all be in my wallet. And I had to sort that out for myself, find a policeman, get myself to the embassy eventually. And my dad, when I reversed the charges home, as you did in those days from a phone box, beep, 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 said, just come home, it's too dangerous, you need to get yourself back. And so I did, and actually in lots of ways he made the decision for me, but I'm glad that he did, because I was probably thinking, this is just too tough. So, again, I think that understanding that, and it was something I really wanted to try to do, but the odds were stacked against you, coming from a country that really didn't have any opportunities for any training or accompanied trips to tournaments and so forth. So I didn't last very long, but I do think a lot of that has fueled what I managed to create eventually when I became the national coach in 1995.
Yeah, definitely. I think what you did is incredibly brave in that sense, because, me as an athlete, I've done it with teammates behind me and all the support in the world. And I can't imagine having to do that so independently and in a world where things are a lot more difficult. So I think that is super interesting in terms of your journey. But I think, like you say, the amount of fuel that's probably now given you to create those opportunities is why you've done so much within sport. So you touched on it there around your kind of journey to be the Scottish national team coach. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of how you got to that point? Because I know there was a few barriers there in terms of being, I think it was the first woman to take on the qualifications that were needed and stuff like that. So how kind of did that come about, and how tough was that process?
I applied for a place on the LTA's Performance Coach Award, which was a 12-month course broken up into a series of workshops, which were all down south, of course. But I was advised to wait until that course came on stream. They'd been creating it for some time, and it was going to be their sort of all singing, all dancing top award. And I was really, really desperate to learn more. I wanted to know how to run a day-to-day program. I wanted to know how you plan to develop players, boys, girls, differences between the two, what's important at different ages. So I really wanted to learn from people who'd been there and done it. So I applied for a place on this course, and I was given one. There were only 20 spaces. I was maybe a little bit surprised that I got one, given that I was pretty much part-time coach at a small club in Scotland, and much of what I was doing was voluntary. I didn't think to ask who else was on the course. I was just thrilled that I got on it. And of course, the reality of all of the workshops being down south is that it takes a lot more time to get there, and it'll cost a lot more money, as everything does when you're part of a GB sport and things are not delivered in your own country. So I went down to the first workshop, and I was kind of full of sort of trepidation at, the kids were sort of 6 and 7. It was a big, big step for me. It was a big outlay of finance and a big time commitment. And of course, I got down there and discovered there was 18 men and there was only 2 women on it. And really on that first day, I had my kind of first sort of encounter with what was absolutely blatant sexism from one of the tutors who said to me, "Oh, welcome to the course. I hope you enjoy it." And I said, "Yeah, you're really looking forward to it." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "You were lucky to get a place on the course, And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, we had to turn a lot of guys away." So I just kept saying, "Really?" I said, "Really, yeah." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "In fact, we had a complaint from one of the guys that we turned away, because he said, 'What could you possibly offer to performance coaching when you have 2 kids?'" And I just looked at him and I went, "Well, we'll just have to see." And I went off and sat in the loos, and I sort of shut the door, and I just thought, I was already feeling right, complete minority, just the 2 women there. I was the only person who wasn't a full-time tennis coach based at a big posh club somewhere. We didn't have big posh clubs in Scotland. Didn't even have indoor courts at that point. And I just thought, and then I really, and then I just thought, no, you're here and you're not going to let somebody put you off through words like that. But it did shake me in the sense that it was so anti-female, and the fact that the guy was a tutor and he chose to share that with me. And one of the biggest things for me in coaching is how you make your pupils or your audience or your team or teammates feel. If you make them feel good, you can get a change
and valued and
get an improvement in performance. If you make them feel bad about themselves, no chance you're going to get the best of them. I mean, it's just an absolute obvious thing. So anyway, so I kind of just knuckled down and got on with it. And I would have to say that the course didn't give me what I was looking for. It gave me a lot of information. It was too lecture based. That I wanted the on-the-job training. I wanted to see people coaching, with great communication skills, how they programmed and planned everything. I just didn't see that. It just felt like more university type lectures and workshops, and there's lots of projects and things. And I passed the course, and I think I passed it because I was clever. I could do the projects. I could write the projects easily, but I'm not sure that it made me a better coach. It gave me a lot of information, but it didn't give me any kind of what I would call formation or transformation. And so really I had to take what I'd learned and go back to Scotland on my own and try and use the information that I'd learned in how to apply it practically. And I continued to, go to conferences and workshops in other countries to try and learn, from other coaches. But as a result of passing that and being the first woman to pass that award, that coaching award, I got the opportunity from the LTA to travel with some of the under 12 and under 14 girls teams, the GB teams. And that was a huge learning opportunity for me to travel to other countries, to feed off all the other coaches who were there, who had been traveling and developing players for a long time. So I made the absolute max out of that. And that helped me enormously when I went on to become the national coach, because not long after I'd passed that award, the national coach job came up for grabs, and it had been vacant for about 18 months. And to be honest, I'm not sure anybody wanted it. I mean, if you think about the lack of infrastructure and no indoor courts, although it was a national coach job, how do you, no track record,
can start,
no world-class coaches. So nobody from another country is going to come in and take that job when they see that there's nothing to work with. However, I understood completely our landscape and how poor it was. And I was persuaded to go for it by the woman who was, you would call it chief exec now, but in those days she was secretary of the Scottish Lawn Tennis Association. And she said to me, "Look, you've got the passion for it. You know Scotland, you know kids, etc. You just passed that award. You should do it." And it was a massive step for me. And anyway, I got the job, and I did it for about 10 years and created I think a good infrastructure for some of our best kids to train. And I had a £25,000 salary and a £90,000 budget for the whole country. £90,000 and no indoor courts. Some indoor courts, 4 courts at Stirling University did come on not long after I'd started. which was great. But with a limited budget and no staff, just literally me and a hopper full of balls and a small block booking in these indoor courts, I started with 20 kids that I picked aged between sort of 7 and 11. And Andy would have been the youngest and Elena Valtasha would have been the oldest. And, you know, of those 20 kids, we had 4 went on to play Davis Cup and 1 went on to play Fed Cup, which obviously was Valtasha, who made eventually 50 in the world. She was British #1 for many years. And Colin Flemmy, Jamie Baker, Jeannie and Andy all played Davis Cup, and the boys obviously won their slams and Olympic golds for Andy. Yeah, but I also I got to a stage when these little kids were getting really good. I had to keep learning, what do I do next? What's the next thing? And hence all the traveling that I was doing with the GB teams really helped me to learn what to do next. But then I realized, you know, I can't do it all on my own. I need to develop a workforce here. So I started a performance coach development program that was funded for 6 years in a row by Sports Scotland. They gave us £10,000 for 6 years in a row. And I identified a number of young coaches and gave them a really good mentoring program. So they still worked in their own backyards, but they came into the indoor centre. I sent them to training camps overseas. I sent them to overseas competitions and so forth, so they could learn on the job. And so I'm just a big believer of on-the-job training. And, you know, there's only so much you can learn by reading books and listening to podcasts and so much. You actually need to, you know, to get out and do it and experience the world in which you want to work. So yeah, that was really how it went. You know, investing in people is a big thing for me. I mean, that's your legacy, is your people. And you know, if I look at Leon Smith now, who started with me when he was 20, he's been the Davis Cup captain for many years now, very successful in that role, head of men's tennis at the LTA. So, you know, and many of the others who came through are still, you know, they're still the kind of main players within Scottish tennis, although some of them obviously work overseas and down south now. But yeah, it was a long road, but I think so much of it was just based on common sense and passion and having an ambition for your sport within your country.
Did you see a shift, I guess, in that kind of sexism within the sport and those challenges that you were faced with in your early career during that time that you were obviously at the forefront? You were kind of now a role model for other female athletes and female coaches, and you were trying to get, you know, young coaches involved and give as many people exposure to coaching and coach education as possible. Did you see a shift immediately, so in that kind of 10-year period that you were the national coach, or did it take you stepping away and then kind of, I guess, working on that specifically after you left that role to see a shift in that attitude?
I think that when I was working in Scotland, because I was in lots of ways starting from scratch, and because there was such a tiny tennis coaching workforce in Scotland at that time, and if you think about it, if you can only play your sport for 6 months of the year, how many coaches are really going to take it seriously? You know, you switch to another sport for the winter because you've got no indoor courts. So, you know, I think that because everything that I was trying to put in place, I was never stepping on anybody's toes because nothing was there. And I don't think that I encountered sexism as such. I think one of the things I definitely encountered was like lack of belief, you know, people who would share the ambition, you know, and even within Tennis Scotland's very amateur board, you know, whenever I spoke about players world class for their age, it was like they were looking at me like I had horns, like, what are you talking about, you know? And we did not that long after I started, we had, you know, some of the best under 12s and under 14s in Britain, and that was really when people started to sit up and take notice, because we went down to the British Championships and we were just mopping up. I realized very quickly how much harder you have to work to make things happen on the women's side than you do on the men's side. You know, I see the size of the team, you know, on the benches at the Davis Cup, and I was fighting to get, you know, a backroom staff of 4 to come with me for my first Fed Cup campaign. You know, and I said, look, the last Davis Cup match, I went to watch the boys, and there was 19 people on the bench, including the team. I went, I'm asking for 4 to try and build the team up to give us a chance to, compete on the same terms as the guys, because Fed Cup was such a tiny thing. We were in the kind of nether regions of Euro Africa zone, and look where we are now. We started to build a team, we started to build a backroom team, and but when I went to my first Fed Cup campaign, there were 16 teams in our group, and we were all in one place in Israel, and it was a bit like playing a club match. It was like we had one man and his dog watching us. We had to create our own media, our own social media was a small thing back then, but obviously we started doing a lot of behind the scenes stuff to try and grow profile for the girls. But of those 16 teams, there was only 2 female captains of women's teams, and it was like, this is not peculiar to my country. This is like everywhere. All the tennis coaches, nearly all the tennis coaches are men, and particularly working at the top end of the game. And now, in 2022, you go on the women's tour, you will hardly see a female coach. So I've been a big promoter of creating opportunities and career pathways for female coaches, because there's a qualification pathway like I got, but is there a career pathway? No, there is not. And it's the jobs for the boys thing, that it always seems to be the guys that get the big jobs and the big labels, and maybe that's because of the numbers. But I've said for a long time that every sport should have a female focused development strand to its strategy that is led by women for women, because we see the world with female eyes and we hear it with female ears, and men don't, and that is just normal. Of course it's normal for men to see the world from a male perspective. They are men, but it doesn't help us if they are always in the main decision making positions. So I think it was 2012 when somebody said to me, you have a profile, you have a voice as a female coach, and you should use your voice, because if you don't make a noise, nobody hears you. And not sure I've kind of shut up since, although I am at the stage now where I do think it's time for the younger generation to really to step up. I really do. I think I'm a granny of 5 now, and I think I've done my time.
On I guess that using your voice as well, how important do you think, in terms of growing female games and getting support for female sport, how important do you think male allies are in that? Obviously Andy and Jamie, for that matter, are 2 incredible male allies in the world of tennis for women's players, but they are so few in what could be so many, in my opinion. And we have that issue in rugby where we really don't have that many male allies, and I don't know whether it's that they don't recognise how big an impact they could have, which is my opinion. But I wonder what opinion do you have in terms of how big an impact male allies can have in terms of growing the female game?
Yeah, it's incredibly important to have male allies and male advocacy. I know that huge strides have been made on the women's side of sport over the years, and I think some of the performances that we now see across a range of individual and team sports make us realise that if we invest in the performance becomes watchable. Then that brings in the whole visibility thing and brands and sponsorship and so forth. But it's got to be good enough to be watchable. And I think for many years, certainly through my sporting lifetime, there was never enough investment in the performance or the pathway for female athletes. And I think that tennis was always in a better position than the other sports because of the work that Billie Jean King and her original 9 gang did, over 50 years ago. They believed in themselves. They believed that they played well enough to attract an audience in their own merit. And they broke away from the men from the tour because the men were getting 90% of the gate and they were only getting 10%. And they did an incredibly brave thing back then to do that and literally start with nothing. But that's why tennis is in such a strong position now in terms of TV coverage, brand endorsements. The wealthiest athletes in the world are nearly all tennis players and have been for some time. And every other sport, in my opinion, is still catching up. But look at the Euros on TV at the moment with the Lionesses, and the performances are incredible because the investment has been consistent for a long time now. And now you're seeing just what female athletes can do, and fans are coming out to support it and get excited about it. And this can only be great for women and girls sports. Because the whole, if you can see it, you can be it thing, but people are getting really excited about it because the skill level is massive. So the allyship, it absolutely, because the top people in most sports are men, it is incredibly important that they understand the importance of encouraging women. I mean, sports are a microcosm of society. Of course, we should all have an opportunity to do what we want to do in sport. And yes, we're still a long way behind, but we have made incredible progress. And that's why I'm always saying we mustn't be complacent about, we've made progress, isn't that great? And then sit back. We have to keep pushing for more. But male advocacy, male allyship is amazingly important. And whenever we find a male ally who is on our wavelength, is on our side, that's such a wonderful, safe space to be, to know that there's someone you can go to who's encouraging, who listens, who will act on what you're talking about, rather than, I suppose, often what we encounter is the tokenism, the listening, and here's a little bit, and off you go. A little bit isn't enough. It has to be, a long-term commitment to the performance. And I've been saying that for a long, long time, that we have to invest in the performances to make sport watchable. And once it's watchable, then it creates all sorts of opportunities for other, not just playing of sport, but working within sport, fans viewing sport, bums on seats and so forth. So but the bulk of the big decisions are made by men. So I guess what we need is career pathways for women to climb, not just on the playing side, but in officiating, refereeing, administration, and so forth as well, so that our voices are always represented.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you very much for such an incredible insight into kind of, I guess, your thoughts, your career, and all of that. A couple of questions I want to round up with, just to kind of, I guess, conclude on some of the stuff we've talked about. But one thing I'm super interested in terms of, you've had such a diverse career in terms of playing, coaching, and everything you've done around that. For you, what has been the key, or a few key highlights, or some of the moments or things that you've achieved which have given you that greatest satisfaction?
I think that whenever somebody asks me about that, about career highlights, the first thing that always pops into my head was Dunblane High School boys team winning the Scottish Schools Championships in 1994. Because I was just a volunteer at the club, and there was these four lads who were part of the team. Well, there was actually six of them, but four of them ended. There was just a team of four, but had six. And one of the six was Callum Davidson, who you might know as was a Scotland footballer and manager at St Johnstone. And he was always on the edge of the team because he was good at every other sport. So he often didn't make the last four because he would be off playing golf or squash or something, or football. Anyway, it's just these four lads from the club who I started when I started doing my volunteering, and they would all at that stage have been like 10 or 11, I suppose, and here they were, sort of 16 or so, and they won the Scottish Schools Championships. And I remember I did all the organising of the matches. I did all the coaching of them, of course, took them to their matches, and then they got to the finals, and it was 4 teams in the final. It was in Edinburgh, and that's when the PE teacher at the school phoned me up and said, "I'll take them through to the finals. Don't worry, you don't need to come. Thanks very much, whatever." And I thought, "Are you kidding me?" And he hadn't shown any interest in it at all. Couldn't even play tennis. No interest. All the matches, of course, had been played at the club, so of course at the school. And so, of course, I went through to watch, and I kind of just watched from a little bit of a distance and everything. But it had a huge impact on me, the fact that they won that, because it was my first success, I suppose, and it was local. It was the local school. There were kids that started off by being a volunteer, and it was a big thing for them, and they were like called the hoop. But there was another instance of sexism. It's like, I'll take over now. You know, and it was, anyway, but I always go back to that. I think that made me very emotional when that happened. And I think, I mean, there's been so many things with kids over the years, but I think when I was the national coach, there were just too many moments of watching our Scottish kids winning British titles. Never would have imagined that in my day, to take busloads or mini busloads of them down to nationals at Bournemouth or Nottingham and come back with silverware. And we'd always have a flag in the back of the bus. And we, when we left, we always say we're off to conquer England, and then we'd come back with some trophies and things like that. But those are huge, huge moments for me as a coach, seeing the joy on the kids' faces. And then, further down the line, obviously being a Fed Cup captain was a massive thing for me. Somebody recognizing that I was a good coach and good manager, I suppose, as well. And then I think watching the boys win the Davis Cup for Great Britain, because in the final they won 3-1, and it was two singles of Andy's and Andy and Jamie in the doubles, and that was massive. Along with all the Davis Cup matches that were in Glasgow, because the team was largely Scottish and the captain was Scottish. That was a massive thing for me as well. And I think when they beat Australia in the semi-final, in 2015 to make the final. I think I remember sitting there when they played doubles on the Saturday, and Jamie and Andy came out to play, and Leon led them on, and there was 9,000 people in the din in that place, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. The atmosphere was just through the roof, and I remember sitting there and thinking about the guy that said, we're not interested in Grand Slam champions or junior Grand Slam champions, we're interested in Grand Slam champions. And I'm thinking, there you go, all of you who didn't believe that we could produce world-class players. I hope some of you are in this audience and seeing this in the East End of Glasgow, where you won't find a tennis court for love nor money, and 9,000 sell-out crowd, largely Scottish team representing Great Britain, and they're going through to the final of what is the World Cup of tennis. Who would have believed that? Well, probably just me. But that was a massive moment for me. Yeah. It kind of pulled everything together. Players, coaches, ambition, and it was in Scotland. Massive. Yeah.
No, that is incredible. I was going to ask you earlier if you've come across any of those guys that said they didn't care about junior. Is spot on in terms of how sometimes it does take that amount of time for you to see what needs, but it's all about the investment over a prolonged period of time to allow that to happen. And it is incredible what you have achieved so far, and I'm sure what you will still achieve. So one final question, which is something that I like to ask everyone we get on, is, and I think this is probably a wee bit redundant with you, because I think you've probably always been very competitive and very determined in terms of everything you've done. But with all your experiences you have now within sport, is there any advice you would give a young Judy Murray, if you could now, in terms of kind of what you've learned and how you would maybe act differently or do something differently from a younger age?
I think if I was talking to myself as a young player, I think I kind of know what I wish I had been more, I wish I'd been more confident, maybe a little bit more aggressive in the way that I played. I wish I'd taken more risks. But I do think, we're all products of our environment. And my environment at that time was, lack of infrastructure, no real ambition, nobody really playing with any kind of big purpose or big picture. But I think that from whether you're a player or whether you're a coach, actually finding somebody that you can learn from, that you enjoy being with, who's been there and done it, that can put an arm around you when you need an arm around you, who can give you a slap on the wrist when you need a slap on the wrist, and tell you the hard truths, I think, we all learn best by copying. And I think I was always very aware when I went into coaching that there was nobody for me to learn from. And even when I went into, I suppose, the parenting side, there were no other parents who had done it in Scotland that I could pick their brains. Not everybody's path is slightly different, and I think that's why I spend so much time sharing my experiences with other coaches and parents in particular, and teachers. Because it's not to say that, of course, one size doesn't fit all, but I think if we shared more actually across sports as well, rather than keeping everything to ourselves, we would create a much bigger, better, stronger, more informed workforce of people across sports. So yeah, I think it's all about people. I think it's about finding the people that can open the doors for you, the people that you can learn from, the people who will encourage you and support you. When you're trying to learn, it doesn't matter what stage of the journey you're on. We all need somebody to help to mentor us, to support us.
Definitely, I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and chatting to me a little bit about everything, really, and career. And I wish you all the luck in the world with all you have coming up, and keep pushing for more.